There comes a point in life when you must decide, do I want to be right or do I want to be at peace? Because not every battle is meant to be fought, and not every person is meant to be convinced. Today, we are addressing one of the most draining and misunderstood experiences, dealing with a narcissist. Many people waste years trying to argue, explain, and prove their truth, only to realize they were playing a game that was never designed for fairness. This message will not only free your mind, but it will teach you a higher strategy, how to rise above manipulation without losing yourself. A narcissist does not seek truth, only control. And the moment you truly understand this, everything begins to make sense in a way it never did before. What once felt confusing, frustrating, and even personal starts to reveal a deeper pattern, one that was never about mutual understanding, but about maintaining dominance over perception, emotion, and outcome. You may have entered conversations thinking that if you just explained yourself clearly enough, calmly enough, or logically enough, the other person would eventually understand. You believe that truth, when presented with clarity, has the power to resolve conflict. But in dealing with a narcissist, you are not engaging with someone who values truth as a destination. You are engaging with someone who values control as the objective. Control over how the conversation flows. Control over how the narrative is shaped. Control over how you feel about yourself by the time the interaction ends. This is why conversations with a narcissist often feel circular. You speak, they deflect. You clarify, they distort. You provide evidence, they dismiss it. And just when you think you're getting somewhere, the entire discussion shifts into a completely different direction, leaving you confused and mentally exhausted. That is not an accident. That is strategy. Because if truth were the goal, the conversation would eventually reach resolution. But when control is the goal, resolution is a threat. Understanding would mean the loss of their advantage. Agreement would mean the loss of their leverage. So the conversation must remain unstable, unpredictable, and emotionally charged, because that is the environment where control thrives. And here is where many people get trapped. They assume the other person is operating from the same internal values. They expect fairness, logic, and honesty. They assume that if something is clearly wrong, it can be corrected. But what they fail to see is that a narcissist is not trying to correct reality. They are trying to reshape it. They are not asking what is true. They are asking what keeps me in power. So they may deny things you know happened. They may twist your words into something unrecognizable. They may even position themselves as the victim in situations where they were clearly the cause of harm. And when you react, when you try to defend yourself or restore the truth, you unknowingly step deeper into their framework where they hold the advantage. Because control is not only about what is said, it is about what is felt. If they can make you doubt yourself, they gain control. If they can provoke you emotionally, they gain control. If they can keep you explaining, defending, and chasing validation, they maintain control. This is why logic often fails in these interactions. Not because your logic is weak, but because logic is not the currency being used. The currency is emotional reaction. The currency is confusion. The currency is your need to be understood. And once you see that, you begin to understand something powerful. You were never losing the argument because you were wrong. You were losing because you were playing a game that was never designed to honor truth in the first place. This realization can be uncomfortable at first because it forces you to let go of a deeply held belief that every conflict can be resolved through communication. But growth requires you to replace comforting illusions with empowering truths. And the empowering truth is this: when someone is committed to control, clarity will not convince them, and honesty will not transform them. So the question is no longer, how do I make them understand? The question becomes, why am I trying to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding me? That shift in perspective is where your freedom begins. Because once you accept that truth is not their goal, you stop over-explaining. You stop trying to prove your reality. You stop engaging in conversations that drain your energy and distort your sense of self. Instead, you begin to operate from awareness. You recognize patterns instead of reacting to moments. You observe behavior instead of absorbing it. And most importantly, you detach your identity from their perception. You no longer measure your worth by their approval. You no longer question your reality because of their denial. You no longer feel obligated to correct every false narrative they create, because you understand something they hope you never realize. Control only exists where participation is given. And the moment you withdraw your need to argue, to convince, to defend, you remove the very foundation upon which their control is built. This is not about silence out of fear. This is not about avoidance out of weakness. This is about intentional disengagement from a system that was never designed for your growth. It is about choosing peace over pointless conflict. It is about choosing clarity over confusion. It is about choosing self-respect over the endless need to be validated by someone who cannot offer it. And when you reach that level of awareness, something remarkable happens. You stop seeing the interaction as a battle to win and start seeing it as a pattern to exit. That is when you reclaim your power. Arguments in their purest form are meant to be bridges between two minds seeking clarity. They are supposed to be tools for discovery, growth, and resolution. But when you are dealing with a narcissist, the very nature of an argument is distorted. It no longer serves truth, it serves ego. And that changes everything. You must first understand that a narcissist does not enter a disagreement with the intention of resolving anything. Resolution requires humility, the willingness to be wrong, and the courage to adjust one's perspectives. A narcissist is not wired for that. Their identity is built on maintaining a sense of superiority, control, and dominance. So, when an argument begins, it is not a discussion, it is a stage. And on that stage, they are not trying to understand you, they are trying to outperform you. Every word you speak becomes material for them to manipulate. They will twist your statements, reframe your intentions, and redirect the conversation in ways that leave you confused and emotionally drained. You may enter the conversation with logic, facts, and sincerity, but they respond with deflection, projection, and distortion. This creates a frustrating imbalance where truth is no longer the standard, control is. The more you try to explain yourself, the more you unintentionally feed their ego. Why? Because your engagement signals to them that they have your attention, your energy, and your emotional investment. It reassures them that they still hold influence over you. Even your frustration becomes a form of validation, because it shows that they have the power to affect your state of mind. This is why arguments with a narcissist often feel circular. You repeat yourself, clarify your intentions, and attempt to bring the conversation back to the original issue. But somehow it keeps drifting. New accusations appear. Old situations are brought up. The focus shifts from the topic to your character. And before you realize it, you are no longer discussing the issue. You are defending your identity. That is not an accident. It is a strategy. When the conversation shifts from facts to emotions, from issues to personal attacks, the narcissist gains the upper hand. Because now, instead of standing on solid ground, you are pulled into emotional quicksand. And the deeper you try to fight, the more you sink. You must recognize that this pattern is not about communication, it is about control. And once you see that clearly, your approach must change. Continuing to argue in that environment is like pouring water into a broken container. No matter how much you give, it will never hold. No matter how clearly you speak, it will never be received in the way you intend. Because the goal was never understanding in the first place. There is also something deeper happening beneath the surface. A narcissist's ego is fragile even if it appears strong. Any disagreement is perceived as a threat, not just to their opinion, but to their identity. So instead of processing your words objectively, they instinctively defend themselves by attacking, deflecting, or dominating. In their mind, losing an argument is not about being wrong, it is about being diminished. And they will resist that at all costs. This is why logic often fails. You cannot reason with someone who is not operating from a place of reason. You cannot reach mutual understanding with someone who sees every interaction as a competition. And you cannot build resolution with someone who benefits from keeping the conflict alive. So what happens to you in the process? You become exhausted. You begin to question your own clarity. You replay conversations in your mind, wondering if you said the wrong thing, if you could have explained it better, if there was a way to finally make them understand. But the truth is, the problem was never your explanation. The problem was the expectation that they wanted to understand. And that realization is liberating because it shifts your focus from trying to win the argument to choosing not to participate in a system that drains you. When you stop arguing, something powerful happens. You remove the fuel that keeps the cycle going. You break the pattern. You step out of the emotional battlefield and reclaim your mental space. And in that moment, you are no longer reacting. You are responding from awareness. This does not mean you become silent out of fear. It means you become selective out of wisdom. You begin to recognize when a conversation is no longer productive, when it has shifted from discussion to manipulation, and when your energy is better preserved than spent. There is strength in restraint. There is power in choosing peace over proving a point. And there is clarity in understanding that not every disagreement deserves your participation. Because true strength is not found in how well you argue. It is found in how well you discern. And once you learn that, you will no longer feel the need to engage in battles that were never meant to be won. Understand this clearly. Your emotional reaction is not just a response, it is a resource. And in the presence of a narcissist, that resource becomes their supply. A narcissist studies emotional patterns, even if they are not consciously aware of it. They observe what triggers you, what excites you, what angers you, and what makes you defend yourself. Then they begin to use those emotional openings as entry points, not for connection, but for control. When you react emotionally, you reveal access. You show them where your boundaries are weak, where your wounds still exist, and where your identity is still seeking validation. And once that information is exposed, it becomes a tool in their hands. This is why arguments with a narcissist rarely stay focused. You may begin with a clear point, a logical concern, or a valid feeling, but suddenly the conversation shifts. It becomes personal. It becomes confusing. It becomes emotionally charged. Before you realize it, you are no longer discussing the issue. You are defending your character. That shift is not accidental. It is intentional. Because when the conversation moves from logic to emotion, they gain the advantage. Logic requires accountability. Emotion can be manipulated. So they provoke, they interrupt, they distort your words. They bring up unrelated past situations. They accuse you of what they themselves are doing. All of this has one purpose: to destabilize your emotional state. Because once you are emotionally unstable, you are easier to control. And here is the deeper truth. A narcissist does not need to win the argument. They only need to win your reaction. If they can make you angry, they feel powerful. If they can make you explain yourself repeatedly, they feel in control. If they can make you doubt your own memory or perception, they feel dominant. Your emotional reaction becomes proof to them that they still have influence over you. That is why you must become aware of your emotional discipline. Emotional discipline is not suppression. It is control with awareness. It is the ability to feel without becoming reactive. It is the ability to recognize provocation without participating in it. You must learn to pause, because in that pause you regain authority over yourself. When a narcissist speaks in a way designed to provoke you, your first instinct may be to respond immediately, to correct, to defend, to push back. But that instinct is exactly what keeps you trapped. Instead, you must interrupt the pattern. Slow down your response, lower your tone, reduce your words, because the less emotional energy you give, the less power they receive. This is why calmness unsettles them. When you do not react the way they expect, it disrupts their strategy. When you refuse to engage emotionally, they lose their leverage. And when they lose their leverage, they often escalate, trying harder to provoke you, pushing further, saying more extreme things. But that escalation is not strength, it is desperation. And you must recognize it as such. Do not be deceived into thinking that you need to match their energy to defend yourself. Matching their energy only pulls you deeper into their system. It places you on a level where chaos replaces clarity. You were not designed to operate in confusion. You were designed to operate in clarity, purpose, and self-control. So when they attempt to provoke you, do not focus on their words. Focus on your response. Ask yourself, what outcome am I feeding right now? Because every reaction is an investment. And you must decide whether you are investing in peace or in conflict. There is power in restraint. There is authority in composure. There is victory in silence. And silence does not mean you have nothing to say. It means you have mastered when to say nothing. You see, the strongest person in the room is not the one who speaks the loudest. It is the one who cannot be controlled by external behavior. When your emotions are no longer easily triggered, you become difficult to manipulate. When you are difficult to manipulate, you become independent. And when you become independent, you no longer serve as a source of emotional supply. At that point, everything changes. Because a narcissist can only maintain influence where there is emotional access. Remove the access and you remove the control. So the goal is not to eliminate your emotions. The goal is to master them. Feel, but do not react impulsively. Understand, but do not engage unnecessarily. Observe, but do not absorb everything directed at you. And remember this, you are not responsible for managing their behavior. You are responsible for managing your response. Once you understand that, you step into a higher level of awareness where your peace is no longer determined by someone else's actions. And that is where true freedom begins. Silence is often misunderstood by those who measure strength through noise, reaction, and constant defense. But true power does not always announce itself. In fact, some of the greatest forms of strength are quiet, controlled, and deeply intentional. When dealing with a narcissist, silence becomes more than just the absence of words. It becomes a calculated decision to rise above manipulation. You must understand that a narcissist thrives in environments where there is chaos, reaction, and emotional intensity. Their influence grows stronger when you engage, when you try to correct them, or when you attempt to defend your truth. Every word you offer in that moment becomes material for them to twist, reshape, and use against you. They are not engaging in dialogue. They are gathering ammunition. And when you continue to respond, you unknowingly step deeper into their game. Silence disrupts that entire system. It removes the very thing they rely on to maintain control. When you choose not to respond, not to argue, not to explain, you are no longer participating in their narrative. You are no longer giving them access to your thoughts, your emotions, or your energy. And for someone who depends on controlling perception, this lack of access is unsettling. But silence requires discipline. It is easy to speak. It is easy to react. It is easy to defend yourself when you know you are right. But it takes a higher level of awareness to pause, to hold your ground internally, and to refuse the urge to engage. Because in that moment, you are not just managing the situation, you are mastering yourself. Many people confuse silence with weakness because they associate power with confrontation. They believe that if you do not respond, you are losing. But that is only true in environments where the goal is mutual understanding. With a narcissist, the goal is never understanding, it is control. So by refusing to engage, you are not losing. You are stepping outside of a system designed to drain you. There is a quiet authority in silence. It communicates that you are not easily provoked. It signals that your peace is not negotiable. It shows that you are no longer available for emotional manipulation. And over time, this consistency creates a boundary that words alone could never establish. However, silence is not about suppression. It is not about ignoring your feelings or pretending that something does not affect you. It is about choosing the right place and the right time to process those emotions away from the person who seeks to exploit them. It is about understanding that not every thought deserves to be spoken, and not every feeling deserves to be displayed in front of someone who does not honor it. When you embrace silence, you begin to see things more clearly. You observe instead of reacting. You recognize patterns instead of getting caught in them. You become aware of how conversations are redirected, how blame is shifted, and how confusion is intentionally created. And this awareness gives you something far more valuable than winning an argument. It gives you clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because once you see the pattern, you stop expecting different outcomes from the same behavior. You stop trying to fix what is not designed to be fixed. You stop investing energy into situations that only return frustration. And instead, you begin to redirect that energy toward your own growth, your own peace, and your own purpose. silence also protects your identity. In constant conflict, people often begin to question themselves. They start to wonder if they are overreacting, if they are misunderstanding, or if they are somehow responsible for the dysfunction. This is one of the most dangerous effects of dealing with a narcissist. It slowly erodes your sense of self. But when you choose silence, you create space between you and that distortion. You give yourself room to reconnect with your own truths without interference. And in that space, you rebuild. You rebuild your confidence. You rebuild your clarity. You rebuild your inner stability. So silence is not passive, it is active. It is a decision. It is a boundary. It is a form of self-respect that says, I will not allow my energy to be used against me. It is the understanding that your voice is valuable, and because it is valuable, you will not waste it in places where it is not honored. There is a time to speak, and there is a time to be silent. Wisdom is knowing the difference. And when you are dealing with someone who twists truth, avoids accountability, and feeds on reaction, silence is not just an option. It is your advantage. Boundaries are not walls meant to shut people out. They are lines that define where you end and someone else begins. When you deal with a narcissistic personality, this distinction becomes essential, not optional. Because without clear boundaries, your identity slowly dissolves into their expectations, their demands, and their distortions of reality. You must understand that a narcissist does not naturally recognize limits. They test, push, and often ignore them, not because they are unaware, but because control is more important to them than respect. If you do not establish your boundaries, they will establish them for you, and those boundaries will always serve their needs at the expense of your well-being. So the question is not whether boundaries are necessary. The question is whether you are willing to enforce them consistently. A boundary begins internally before it is ever expressed externally. It starts with a decision. I will no longer tolerate what diminishes me. That decision requires clarity. You must know what behavior is unacceptable, what treatment you refuse to accept, and what access you are no longer willing to give. Without clarity, your boundaries will be unstable. And unstable boundaries invite repeated violation. But clarity alone is not enough. You must also have the courage to communicate those boundaries. Not emotionally, not aggressively, but firmly and calmly. Because the power of a boundary is not in how loud it is. It is in how consistent it is. When you say, I will not engage in conversations where I am disrespected, you are not asking for permission. You are declaring a standard. And the moment that standard is crossed, your response must align with your words. If you continue to engage, argue, or explain after your boundary is violated, you are teaching the other person that your limits are flexible. And narcissistic individuals are highly observant of inconsistency. They will notice when you say one thing and do another. And when they see that your boundaries can be bent, they will push even further. This is why enforcement is more important than explanation. You do not need to convince someone to respect your boundary. You need to demonstrate that crossing it has consequences. That may mean ending a conversation. It may mean walking away. It may mean reducing contact. It may even mean complete disengagement. And here is where many people struggle, because enforcing boundaries often comes with discomfort. You may feel guilt. You may feel fear. You may feel the urge to go back and explain yourself again, hoping this time they will understand. But understand this clearly. A narcissist does not misunderstand your boundary. They resist it because it limits their control. So when you hold your boundary, you are not being difficult. You are being disciplined. You are choosing long-term peace over short-term approval. And there is another truth you must accept. When you begin to enforce boundaries, you will often see an escalation in behavior. The narcissist may become more manipulative, more aggressive, or more dismissive. This is not a sign that your boundary is wrong. It is a sign that your boundary is working. Because for the first time, the system they relied on, your compliance, your emotional reactions, your willingness to engage, is being disrupted. Do not interpret resistance as failure. Interpret it as confirmation. And in those moments, your strength will be tested. Because it is easy to set a boundary, it is difficult to maintain it when pressure increases. This is where self-respect becomes your anchor. You must remind yourself that protecting your peace is not selfish, it is necessary. You cannot function, grow, or thrive in an environment where your identity is constantly challenged or diminished. Boundaries are not just about protection, they are about preservation. They preserve your clarity, your emotional stability, and your sense of self. And the more you practice this, the stronger you become. At first, it may feel unnatural. You may second guess yourself. You may feel like you are being too harsh or too distant. But over time, something powerful happens. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to realize that you do not need external validation to justify your limits. You do not need agreement to stand firm. You do not need understanding to choose peace. And that is when your identity becomes solid. Because a person with clear boundaries cannot be easily manipulated. They cannot be easily controlled. They cannot be easily pulled into cycles of confusion and emotional exhaustion. They stand grounded. They respond with intention, not impulse. They choose engagement, not obligation. And most importantly, they understand that access to their life is a privilege, not a right. So instead of trying to manage the narcissist, manage your boundaries. Instead of trying to change their behavior, change your response. Because the moment you take full responsibility for what you allow, what you engage with, and what you walk away from, you step into a level of power that no manipulation can reach. And in that space, your peace is no longer negotiable. There is a powerful truth that many people resist because it challenges their hope more than their logic. You cannot change someone who benefits from dysfunction. This is not about a lack of intelligence, effort, or love on your part. It is about understanding the hidden reward system that governs human behavior. Every person repeats what works for them. If manipulation brings them control, they will continue manipulating. If denial protects them from accountability, they will continue denying. If emotional chaos gives them attention, sympathy, or dominance, then chaos becomes their strategy, not their accident. You must begin to see behavior not as random, but as purposeful. A narcissist does not accidentally distort reality. They do it because it preserves their image. They do not accidentally ignore your feelings. They do it because empathy would require responsibility. They do not accidentally hurt you repeatedly. They do it because there is no internal consequence strong enough to make them stop. And this is where many people get trapped. They assume that if they just explain better, love harder, stay longer, or sacrifice more, eventually the other person will wake up. But you must understand this clearly. People do not change when they are comfortable with the results of their behavior. Change only begins when the cost of staying the same becomes greater than the benefit. If someone continues to gain power, control, or emotional supply from how they treat you, then in their internal system there is no reason to change. In fact, your patience can sometimes reinforce the very dysfunction you are trying to fix. Think about it. If every time they cross a boundary you stay, what lesson is being taught? If every time they manipulate you engage, what behavior is being rewarded? If every time they dismiss you, you try harder to be understood, what pattern is being reinforced? Without realizing it, many people participate in the cycle they are trying to escape. This is not about blaming yourself. It is about awakening your awareness. Because once you understand that the other person is operating from a place of benefit, not ignorance, you stop personalizing their behavior. You stop asking, what is wrong with me? And you start asking, what are they gaining from this? That shift is powerful. It frees you from the illusion that your love is the missing ingredient. It frees you from the emotional exhaustion of trying to fix what is not broken in their eyes. And most importantly, it returns your focus to the only place you truly have control, yourself. You cannot force awareness into someone who avoids it. You cannot build empathy inside someone who rejects it. And you cannot create transformation in someone who is committed to staying the same. But you can transform how you respond. You can stop negotiating your worth. You can stop explaining yourself to someone who is invested in misunderstanding you. You can stop offering emotional access to someone who uses it as a tool against you. And when you do this, something remarkable happens. The dynamic begins to change, not because they have changed, but because you have removed the benefits they once relied on. Your silence disrupts their control. Your boundaries disrupt their patterns. Your detachment disrupts their expectations. And for the first time, the system no longer works in their favor. Now understand this, when you remove those benefits, they may resist. They may escalate. They may try harder to provoke you, confuse you, or pull you back into the old pattern. Not because they are becoming worse, but because the strategy that once worked is no longer effective. This is where your strength is tested, because growth requires consistency. It requires you to hold your boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable. It requires you to stay grounded even when they attempt to destabilize you. It requires you to remember that your goal is not to change them, but to protect yourself. And that is the true breakthrough. When you stop trying to change someone who benefits from dysfunction, you reclaim your energy. You reclaim your clarity. You reclaim your peace. You realize that your life is not meant to be spent managing someone else's broken patterns. It is meant to be lived with purpose, dignity, and self-respect. And in that realization, you become free. Free from the need to convince. Free from the need to fix. Free from the need to stay where you are not valued. Because the moment you accept that they are not changing, not because they can't, but because they won't, you finally give yourself permission to do what you should have done all along. Choose yourself. Detachment is often misunderstood as coldness, indifference, or a lack of care, but in truth, it is one of the highest forms of emotional intelligence a person can develop. It is not about shutting down your feelings, it is about gaining mastery over them. When you're dealing with a narcissist, detachment becomes not just helpful, it becomes essential for your survival, your peace, and your identity. You must first understand that a narcissist feeds on emotional engagement. Whether it is love, anger, frustration, or even confusion, any strong emotional response keeps you connected to their cycle. They do not necessarily care whether the attention is positive or negative. What matters is that they are the center of your emotional focus. This is why arguments, explanations, and even attempts to fix things often leave you feeling drained. The more you invest emotionally, the more control they gain over your state of mind. Detachment breaks that cycle. It is the conscious decision to no longer allow someone else's behavior to dictate your internal world. It is when you begin to observe instead of absorb. Instead of reacting instantly to their words or actions, you create space between what they do and how you respond. In that space lies your freedom. This does not mean you ignore reality or pretend that nothing is happening. It means you see clearly without becoming emotionally entangled. You recognize manipulation without feeling the need to confront it every time. You notice patterns without trying to change the person behind them. And most importantly, you stop taking their behavior personally. That is a powerful shift, because one of the greatest traps in dealing with a narcissist is believing that their actions are a reflection of your worth. When they dismiss you, you feel undervalued. When they blame you, you feel guilty. When they distort reality, you begin to question yourself. But detachment allows you to step back and realize that their behavior is not about you. It is about their own internal dysfunction, their own need for control, and their own unresolved insecurities. Once you truly grasp this, something changes within you. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop seeking validation from someone who is incapable of giving it. You stop chasing clarity in conversations that are designed to confuse you. Instead, you anchor yourself in your own understanding, your own values, and your own sense of identity. Detachment also requires discipline. It is easy to say, "I won't react," but much harder to practice it when emotions are high. There will be moments when you feel the urge to defend yourself, to correct them, to make them see the truth. That urge is natural, but maturity is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to choose your response despite it. So when those moments come, you pause, you breathe. You remind yourself that engaging will not bring resolution. You recognize that your peace is more important than winning a temporary exchange. And in doing so, you reclaim control over yourself. Another important aspect of detachment is letting go of the need to fix or change the narcissist. Many people remain stuck because they believe that if they just say the right thing, act the right way, or love enough, the other person will eventually understand. But this belief keeps you trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment. True detachment means accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. It means acknowledging that some people are not willing or not able to meet you at the level of honesty, empathy, or respect that you desire. And once you accept that, you stop investing your energy into trying to transform them. Instead, you invest that energy into protecting and strengthening yourself. This is where self-respect becomes the foundation of detachment. When you value yourself, you no longer tolerate constant disrespect. When you respect your time, you no longer engage in endless, unproductive arguments. When you honor your peace, you no longer allow chaos to have unlimited access to your life. Detachment is not about pushing others away. It is about pulling yourself back into alignment with who you are. And as you practice detachment, you will notice a shift not only in your relationship with the narcissist, but also in your relationship with yourself. You will feel lighter, clearer, and more grounded. Situations that once triggered intense reactions will begin to lose their power over you. You will become less reactive and more intentional. This is growth, because true strength is not found in controlling others. It is found in controlling your response to them. In the end, detachment is not about losing connection. It is about choosing the right kind of connection. It is about refusing to be emotionally tied to dysfunction while remaining deeply connected to your own sense of purpose, clarity, and peace. It is about understanding that your energy is valuable and not everyone deserves access to it. And when you fully embrace detachment, you reach a place where the narcissist no longer has the same influence over your life. Their words may still exist, their behavior may not change, but your internal world remains steady. You are no longer pulled into their storms because you have learned how to stand firmly in your own calm. That is not weakness. That is power in its purest form. Winning is not proving them wrong, it is refusing to play. Most people have been conditioned to believe that victory means correcting the other person, exposing their flaws, or forcing them to admit the truth. But when you are dealing with a narcissistic mindset, that definition of winning becomes a trap. Because the game itself is designed in such a way that truth does not matter, only control does. So the more you try to prove your point, the deeper you are pulled into a cycle where logic is ignored. Your words are twisted and your intentions are questioned. And before you realize it, you are no longer seeking resolution. You are simply trying to survive the conversation. This is where awareness becomes your greatest weapon. You must recognize that not every situation requires your participation. Just because someone invites you into conflict does not mean you are obligated to attend. And this is difficult for many people because walking away feels like losing. It feels like surrender. It feels like you are allowing false narratives to exist without correction. But in reality, you are doing something far more powerful. You are choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over validation. A narcissist thrives on engagement. Their influence exists only as long as you are emotionally involved. The moment you step back, the moment you detach, the moment you refuse to respond in the way they expect, you disrupt the entire dynamic. Because now they are left without the one thing they depend on, your reaction. And without your reaction, their control begins to weaken. Understand this deeply. You are not responsible for correcting every false perception someone has about you. You are not obligated to explain your truth to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. There is a difference between being misunderstood and being intentionally misrepresented. One seeks clarity, the other seeks power. And when power is the goal, no amount of explanation will ever be enough. So what does it mean to refuse to play? It means you no longer engage in circular arguments that go nowhere. It means you recognize patterns instead of reacting to moments. It means you stop defending yourself against accusations that were never meant to be resolved. You begin to see that the argument is not about the issue. It is about control, about dominance, about emotional manipulation. And once you see that clearly, you stop taking the bait. Refusing to play also means accepting a hard truth. Not everyone will see you accurately. Not everyone will understand your intentions. Not everyone will validate your experience. And that must become acceptable to you. Because if your peace depends on being understood by everyone, then your peace will always be unstable. True power is internal, not external. It is the ability to remain grounded when someone tries to provoke you. It is the strength to remain silent when someone is trying to pull you into chaos. It is the discipline to walk away even when every part of you wants to speak, defend, and correct. Because you understand that your energy is too valuable to be spent on battles that produce no growth. There is also wisdom in recognizing that arguments with narcissistic individuals often escalate, not resolve. What begins as a simple disagreement can quickly turn into blame-shifting, gaslighting, and emotional exhaustion. And by the end of it, you are left drained, confused, and questioning yourself while they remain unaffected or even satisfied. That is not a healthy exchange. That is a cycle designed to weaken you. Refusing to play breaks that cycle. It creates space for clarity, space for emotional recovery, space for you to reconnect with your own sense of truth without interference. And in that space, you begin to realize something powerful. You never needed their validation to begin with. Your worth was never dependent on their agreement. Your truth does not require their approval. This is where freedom begins. Freedom is not found in winning arguments. It is found in no longer needing them. It is found in the quiet confidence of knowing who you are, regardless of what someone else says. It is found in the ability to disengage without guilt, to walk away without explanation, and to choose yourself without apology. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable at first, because you are breaking a habit. You are stepping out of a pattern that may have existed for a long time. But discomfort is often the first sign of growth. It means you are choosing a new way, a higher way. So when the next opportunity to argue presents itself, pause. Ask yourself, is this a conversation that leads to understanding, or is this a trap disguised as communication? Is this person open to truth, or are they committed to control? And most importantly, does engaging in this serve my peace, or does it destroy it? Your answer will guide your action, because at the highest level of awareness, you begin to understand that your greatest power is not in what you say, but in what you refuse to entertain. And that is the shift. You move from proving to protecting, from reacting to choosing, from engaging to elevating. And in that elevation, you win, not because they lost, but because you refuse to lose yourself. That is the kind of victory that no one can take from you.